Cynthia Burke has been a grief counselor since the AIDS outbreak and subsequent creation of respite care, beginning in the 1980s. The depth and scope of her life experience, both professionally and personally, and her spectacular organization, Friends Indeed, offer extraordinary gifts and opportunities. Here is Cynthia Burke in her own words.
Hi, my name's Cynthia Burke, and I've been working for more than 20 years at an organization called Friends Indeed, and we are a crisis center for people dealing with life-threatening physical illness, with caregiving, and with grief and bereavement. So in the last 20 plus years, I've had a lot of experience talking with people about grief. And basically, in our culture, we're very weird around things concerning illness and death and dying. So when I speak to people about this subject, one of the things that occurs to me that I wish to convey is that we human beings might benefit by looking at how we view death and dying, what we think it means to us, and examine the beliefs and the cliches that surround this experience. Things like, he died before his time. What? How do we know he died before his time? He died when he died. That was his time. Or, never sick a day in his life, and then he died. Well, everybody is always okay until they're not okay, and everybody is alive until they die. And since we're all headed in the same direction, it might be useful to our ongoingness if we made friends with death. And that doesn't mean that we have to walk around being terrified about dying all the time. It's quite the opposite. It's, okay, this is what's going to happen, and I'm going to live my life to the best of my ability up to that point. So what happens when we lose someone we love? Just the word lose, as if we really could lose someone. So I question the use of that word as well. Someone has died. Why cannot we say someone has died? I feel a loss in my heart or in my life because that person is no longer in it. But that's what's happened. And in any pairing between two people, parent, child, friend, lover, spouse, whatever, one of us is out of here first unless we both go down on the same plane. So it probably would be useful in relationships to speak about that and speak about how we feel about what we want when we near that time in our lives. And of course things like advance directives and healthcare proxies, stuff like that, to get that set up at some point in your life ahead of time is always useful. But the notion that something has gone wrong when someone dies is really something that needs to be looked at. The Buddhists, I believe, say that no person dies one single minute before or one single minute after they were supposed to. And how do we know that? Because as I said a minute ago, that's when they died. That's when it happened. So the idea, almost to a one, people who come to Friends Indeed in early grief go through some of the exact same feelings around, I should have done something differently, if only we had seen a different doctor, if only I had been a better caregiver, if I should have done, all of that stuff, all of those kinds of regrets. It's entirely normal, if you will, and really completely appropriate to examine that and to realize, no, everything unfolded exactly as it should, as it must. We talk at Friends Indeed a lot about living on two planes of reality. Chances are there are many, but for the sake of this discussion, let's just talk about two planes of reality. On the material plane, we take care of, we attend, we fix what's fixable, we do all the business of living on the material plane. But on the spiritual plane, we hold that nothing's going wrong. We have no idea what any individual's journey is supposed to look like, No one comes into this life with a note pinned to their diaper that says long life, no suffering. As far as I can tell, no one gets out of here without some piece of suffering, many much greater suffering than others. But since suffering seems to be a part of what we're doing here, it might be good to look at that and examine that. So often there are enormous lessons to be learned in all of these situations around illness and death and dying. And sometimes, very often, in fact, when we're in the middle of it, it's hard to see what the lesson might be. But when we have a little more space and we can pull back a little and we can see, that's right, it happened, that's how it was meant to happen. And I did whatever I could here on the material plane. This doesn't mean that we think it's swell that someone died, no big deal, it was part of their path. No, not at all. And it's perfectly reasonable to hold that we're not writing this story, we're not in charge of how it all turns out, it's not our job, it's not in our power, and it's not useful to the person that's ill or dying. There are certain circumstances in all of this that require their own set of reactions, if you will, and feelings. Certainly when someone takes their own life, there's something that goes with that in a way. And if someone dies suddenly, accidentally, with no warning whatsoever, that has its own shock and its own pathology, if you will, in this situation. And even in that, we don't know that it's not exactly perfect. We don't know that it's exactly what was supposed to happen. And our suffering comes from thinking this isn't it. This isn't what's supposed to be happening. That's our suffering. So normalizing all of this stuff, normalizing illness and death and dying and grief, and being comfortable talking about it. My grandchildren say to me, Nana, I don't want you to die. And I say, I don't want to die either, but guess what? I'm going to one day. And they kind of look at me and say, but guess what else? I'm alive right now. So let's just deal with that, okay? And they just, they laugh at me and we go on. But yes, we talk about that. Yes, one day Nana will not be here anymore, and we don't know when that is. We don't know when any of us, you or your sisters or your mother or father or anybody, we don't know. But what we do know is the day that we're in, and that's what we have to focus on, and that's what we have to work with. So the whole notion of grieving, you're meant to be heartbroken if someone you love has died. You're meant to not be able to get out of bed in the morning. You're meant to cry, feel like you're crying 24/7. You're meant to think that your life can't go on. All of that stuff is entirely appropriate. And as long as we embrace those feelings and not push against them and think something's gone wrong, it makes moving through it so much easier. Actually, it's really a profound experience to be able to have the kind of intimacy with another human being wherein we can talk about our own dying, our own leaving this planet, what we might want it to look like. It's interesting because a grown-up friend of mine many years ago, a gay man, when being gay wasn't as okay as it is now, went to SAGE, which is a wonderful organization for aging, elderly gay people, and he wanted to volunteer, and the first thing they asked him to do was to plan his own funeral. And it was an amazing experience for him. And within maybe 6 months of his going through this experience, he had a heart attack and he died. Boom. And his niece, who was about his same age, went into his files and she found his funeral that he had designed, and she followed it to the letter. It was fabulous. fabulous. It was absolutely fabulous. I felt like I wanted to write him a thank you note for his own funeral. That kind of thing. Now, he probably would not have done that had it not been a requirement for his volunteering to work with elderly and aging people. So I think that something like that can be an amazing and an enriching experience. At Friends Indeed, we have 6 groups a week that are called the big groups. And in these groups, we do the work of Friends Indeed. And as I said a minute ago, we're a crisis center for people dealing with life-threatening physical illness, with caregiving, and with grief and bereavement. We have the work of Friends Indeed is the same no matter what group you are in, but each group has a slightly different focus from time to time. We have a grief group that's Mondays at noon. We have a caregivers group that's Tuesday at noon. We have a group that focus of which is cancer. We have 2 HIV groups. And in all of these groups, our focus is to see what shows up in our lives and work with it. Whether it's illness, whether it's caregiving, whether it's grieving. See it and look at it and work with it. And see how these experiences can make us be more conscious human beings, more compassionate for ourselves and perhaps compassionate toward others. We normalize whatever a person is going through. We don't say, oh my God, we don't say this is the worst thing that ever happened to you, but we do acknowledge that things are difficult and challenging and scary and sad, and we can deal with all of it. But we don't add to it. For example, in talking about cancer, cancer is neutral. It's just cancer. How we view cancer, what we think it means to have cancer if we do, or our loved one has cancer, how we think people view us in the world because of cancer, all of that is out of our own perceptions about the notion of cancer. We can work on that. Cancer is a circumstance we cannot do much to change necessarily, but we can work on how we hold the whole experience, which means we are not adding to the suffering of whatever is going in and around dealing with cancer. And that makes, for one thing, it really frees up people's inner resources when they're not adding to their suffering. And our take here at Friends Indeed is, if we could say it, the work in one sentence, it's that the quality of your life is not determined by the circumstances. You can have cancer and still have a happy moment, a good life, a plan, good day. Most of us, many of us humans, when we get a diagnosis, the first thing we do, if we're not already planning our memorial service, we're running down the road and we're living in a negative prediction about what's going to happen. What happens in us is we enter into that negative prediction, suffer the consequences of something that hasn't even happened yet, and in that process, we give away all of the resources we need for this current moment of living and healing. So all the work we do is come on back to this moment. The truth is, human beings are magnificent and incredibly resourceful. And everything we handle in the moment. When we look back over our lives, and I've already had a fairly long life, when I look back and I see some of the stuff I've come through, had I seen it coming, I would have said, oh, I'm never going to be able to handle that. That's going to be much too difficult, much too sad, much too scary, or whatever. And P.S., of course, I handled it as everybody does. So to shift our perceptions and to really work on what it means to actually live in the present moment, which is the only place that joy exists, the only place that we are really free, is something that requires support, changing of perceptions, working on understanding, hearing how other people are dealing with things, especially in the grieving area. If someone comes in who's newly in grief and they hear, and they can hardly speak because they feel like they're crying all the time, and they hear somebody else say, I've been coming to Friends Indeed, it came 3 years ago when my partner died, and I'm just beginning to feel like I'm getting my life back. Wow, that's a pretty powerful statement. And even though the person who is newly grieving might not recognize it totally, something drops down inside that says, wow, maybe that could be me at some point, even though in that moment they feel like they'll never be anything but as sad and as heartbroken as they are. The other thing that happens in our culture is that people don't want you to suffer. They don't want to be around your suffering. They want you to pull yourself together and get on with it so that they don't have to experience how sad and heartbroken they could be in a similar situation. And so they say things like, you have to get on with your life, and you have to get over it. And no, you get over a cold, you get over the flu, you get over the measles, but you do not get over the death of someone you love. Over time, that death moves into another part of your container, if you will. It might be over here instead of right here. And that only happens over time. At Friends Indeed, we give people the time. They don't have to sign up for groups. They're all drop-in. They just have to show up on time. And they don't have to say a single thing except their first names when we go around the room. Our groups are very tightly facilitated. They aren't free-for-alls, so everybody gets in there and dumps whatever it is they want to talk about. No, it's not like that at all. And we really, because we know we can't change the circumstances, we work very much on the feelings. How are you feeling about what you're going through? Well, the doctor said, and then she did, and then that happened. No. How are you feeling? Well, when we went back to the, no. How are you feeling? It's so difficult for people to simply say, I'm angry, or I'm frustrated, or I'm sad, or I'm lonely, or I'm happy. Everybody gets stuck, almost to a one, gets stuck in their story. The story's the least important part of it. It's the feelings around everything that are really important, and that's what we work on here at Friends Indeed. And the reason we do it, and we've been doing it we just started our 22nd year, is because we see that the way we're dealing with this stuff works. We see people come to Friends Indeed on their knees in despair sometimes over any one of the issues that we deal with here. And in very short order, there's another kind of a feeling, another kind of a floor under them. They suddenly see that there's possibility, whereas before it was just all dark and no possibility for change. So it's quite wonderful and exciting to see that process take place. And that's why we keep doing it. And the truth is, we're all working on our lives here together. Particularly, I think it's interesting that the staff works right along with the so-called clients. So we're not in a one-up, one-down position. We level the playing field. We're all working on our lives together on whatever shows up. And I think that that's a fairly unique approach. Yeah. Actually, we take our leads from the people who come here. If they have children, young children, there are many places in this area, in the New York City area, many wonderful people dealing with grieving children. So there are those places we can refer people to as a resource. But in terms of what we say or tell a person to do or how they have to handle it, we trust that if the work that they see that's being done here is of value to them, they will find their way. We don't try to fix people. We don't tell people what to do. We trust that you know deep in your heart exactly what you need. We create the space for you to come upon that yourself. Because my telling you what to do or where I think this is going is not going to be useful. Because you're where you are now. So I want to see where you are now and acknowledge that. You hear that the glory of group work is that you hear people at different stages in this process. So it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of work, It's tailor-made for each individual, even though the spiritual principles upon which we operate are pretty sound. For example, the spiritual principle is that there's no such thing as error, nor even the possibility of error. And when you wrap yourself around that, it's like, whoa, okay, what does that mean? No error? No error. So, what happens when you begin to work this differently is there is a taste of freedom and a certain amount of relaxation, that you're not carrying the whole way you think it ought to be. You're not stuck in this should be other than it is. And you begin to be able to be around people who are either nurturing you where you are right now, or you're able to say to someone, you know what, that's not helpful, that's not useful, I can't use that right now. I appreciate your thoughts and your caring, but I can't really use that right now. And stick up for yourself in that way, so that you are not at anybody else's telling you what to do with your life. You know, that doesn't, particularly in a moment when when the last thing you want to be told is get over yourself. You know, no. You are how you're feeling. It's totally okay. It's totally appropriate. People will identify a problem, and secondly, right away they want a solution. No. Solution shows up around step 3. Step 2 is acceptance. The more I can accept the situation as it is, the more than I can accept my feelings around it, accept and accept and accept, soon I notice that things begin to change. Change shows up all by itself. I don't really have to work at making a change. You know, we don't effort at this. We allow it to unfold in a way that seems user-friendly to each individual that comes through the door here. And this work is not for everybody. I mean, some people are not up for it. They're so deeply entrenched in this isn't it, I think it was the Buddha, again, I keep quoting Buddhism, I think it was Buddha who said, in order to become enlightened, we must give up our suffering. Many people are so organized around their suffering, they are hanging onto it with all fours. They just simply don't want to let it go. Sometimes those kinds of human beings are not able to be reached by this kind of work. And then there are those very intransigent sorts that will sit here for weeks on end, and suddenly the light goes on and they, I just got something, just realized something. And it's terrific when something like that happens, you know, because we're not taught any of this stuff. We don't grow up. For example, do we say to children when they're crying, oh, it's great to cry. Have a really good cry. You're sad, fabulous. That's one of the feelings that you have in this life, being sad and crying. No, we say stop crying, or come on, I'll buy you an ice cream. Oh, don't cry anymore. No, don't do that. That's, you know, one barrier that we put up. And the other one is, if you do such and such is going to happen. We don't know that. We don't know that. But we set it up again and again and again. And this is just lazy language, you know, lazy thinking, stuff that doesn't really work. And that's another thing we say at Friends Indeed a lot. We might say to someone, when they show up, we're not going to try to change anybody's mind. If you think it's going okay, great. We might ask, how's it working for you? And if they say, fine, perfect. If they say it's not working so well, we hold up some other possibilities. But again, we trust that you know, inside you know exactly what you need for your ongoingness. And that's very empowering, to look at another human being and realize that he, like you, has the same capacity for everything else that we see and want and feel in other people. And that's pretty heady stuff. That's good. Keeps me coming to work every day. I mean, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross identified the stages of dying, I guess it was. And yes, some of those show up, some of them don't show up. They don't necessarily show up in the order in which she laid them down. Those were guidelines that she and herself in later years said those were meant to be guidelines. So we don't try to fit anybody into steps and stages. What we do promise you is that it will change. It absolutely will change. We don't know when or how. But The only way out of this pain is through it. You can't drink it away, drug it away, sex it away, shop it away, work it away. No. The only way out of the feelings that you have is through them. And so once you step in, I mean, many people think if I allow myself to be as sad and as heartbroken as I am, if I step into that morass, I'm never going to come out. Yeah, you will. You really will. Not only will you get through it, but the next time it arises, it won't get you in quite the same way that it did the first time. And again, this grieving thing is a process. You might suddenly one day wake up and think, wow, this was an okay day. I think I have a handle on this today. Tomorrow, you might be hit as if it happened 5 minutes ago all over again. And you think, oh my goodness, this is not working at all. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. That's part of the process. Well, one has to just trust that stepping into these feelings is the thing to do. They're there. They're absolutely there. Give yourself, I mean, if you are in your own home, in your own bedroom, take a tennis racket, beat up on a pillow, scream and yell, get down on your knees, pound on the floor, sob your eyes out, do whatever, just give yourself permission. I had a friend he used to stand on the edge of the subway platform, and as the subway was going into the tunnel, he would scream at the top of his lungs his anguish and let it just go into the tunnel, and no one could hear it because he was right at the edge of the platform.